The Hollywood Blacklist. After World War II was over, a lot of things had changed. Many people had learned much about communism from the other countries we were at war with, some with good impressions and some very bad. When people started to suggest communism as being a good thing and talking about how it could work for our country, the people who were against it panicked and went overboard. Some strong anti-communists believed that the nation's security depended on stopping the spread of communism. The House of Un-American Activities Committee was then formed to investigate allegations of communist activity. One man in particular was against the idea of communism so much he took a stand. Joseph McCarthy, a U.S. Senator, began something later on to be called McCarthyism. McCarthyism is known as the practice of accusing people with positions of power or influence of disloyalty, subversion, and treason. As McCarthyism started to spread, it had great influences on things like politics and even the big entertainment businesses. Once it had reached Hollywood, it became known as the Hollywood Blacklist. The Hollywood Blacklist was a time of accusations of communism that occurred in Hollywood. Some films that were being produced at the time had been accused of sending secret pro-communist messages. Anti-communist legislators were concerned that the movie industry was undercover subversive propaganda, but the leftist organizations were on the side of the struggling actors and directors. The House of Un-American Activities Committee was sent to investigate the film industry to see if any pro-communist messages were being promoted. More than 40 actors, directors, and other connections to the movie industry were accused of holding communist loyalties. These people were then put onto a blacklist where people denied them employment in the U.S. to try to avoid spreading their so-thought communist activity. Even though a lot of people had been accused of dealing with or promoting communism, there was small evidence of each accusation. Members of the House of Un-American Activities Committee had to dig deep into the films and look at the details to find any reason to accuse these people. The accused were held in a very tough position. They knew that their reputations were on the line, especially for being so big and now in the public eye, and if they confessed to being pro-communist, their careers would be over. Most of the people just cooperated with the investigators and cited their Fifth Amendment when asked too far into it. Some people, however, panicked about losing their reputation and careers, so they pointed fingers at other people, claiming that they were the communists and not themselves. Protests were held against all the accusations that they later claimed had no real evidence. However, 10 of the people being accused of promoting communist activities stood up for themselves and the others being accused. These 10 people were Alva Bessie, Herbert Biberman, Lester Cole, Edward Dmytryk, Ring Lardner Jr., John Howard Lawson, Albert Maltz, Samuel Ornitz, Robert Adrian Scott, and Dalton Trumbo. These people didn't just refuse their cooperation, but also claimed that the anti-communist hearings were a violation of their First Amendment and that they could belong to any committee that they wanted to. After all their fighting, all 10 people were still found guilty and sentenced to a year in jail with a $1,000 fine on top of that. The only one who ever complied with the investigations was Edward Dmytryk, as he gave away more than 20 of his colleagues' names as being communists. Dmytryk was also taken off the blacklist for helping give away names of communists. The Hollywood Blacklist is also widely known for its strong connections with another huge event in American history. The Salem witch trials in Salem, Massachusetts, was also a time for widespread panic and accusations. Because Salem had a monarchy government, religion was their number one focus in their society. Once a group of girls started acting up and in strange ways, the word of witchcraft spread throughout Salem and caused panic. Witchcraft is a huge sin and could lead to death. Even the group of girls were panicked, so they accused even more people just to save them, just as the people convicted with communism had. The evidence, or lack of evidence, also parallels within the events. As little information was given as evidence at the communist trials, even less of respectable evidence was given at the Salem witch trials. At the witch trials, so-called evidence would be given by marks on the body, whether they float or not, and even just by taking people's word when they claimed to be possessed by the convicted person. As actual lives were on stake at the trials in Salem, it wasn't that serious in Hollywood, but the reputations and careers were on the line for those accused of communism. An American playwright, Arthur Miller, was famous for pointing out these similarities in his play The Crucible. Miller was also convicted of communism and thought that the whole thing was crazy and just like the witch trials. He was a big contributor in ending the Hollywood communism hunts and also showing people how we were only replaying a crazy time in history. Both the Hollywood Blacklist communism hunts and Salem witch hunts have been a big and crazy part in American history. Many people were killed and had their reputations ruined from being paranoid and not providing real evidence. We have moved past these crazy accusations, but that doesn't mean something else couldn't become the new witch hunts. These events were an example of how important learning from our history is if we don't want to repeat it.